Make their first speech.
The American two-party system has historically served as the pillars that represent the basis of our democratic system. They represent the backbone of the very system that allows individual voices to be heard across the country. And because a shout into the democratic void is the same as being voiceless, we propose the motion. This House believes the benefits of the American two-party system outweigh the harms. In this debate, I will be doing two things. First, going over the framing, and second, going over our first two substantive arguments, which are that first, we are keeping America centrist, and second, on coalition building, while our second speaker will bring up our third argument on checks on parties. But first, looking to the framing in the round. The debate ought to be decided by which team produces the best democratic society. The two-party system can be considered increasingly good or bad based on how it helps the American democracy. America's democracy is unique from those across the world. Thus, we say there are two essential dimensions to American democracy: balance and stable progress. The inclusion of both dimensions in the United States is crucial. First, with balance, meaning a system where one party does not dominate and terrorize others. For example, Vladimir Putin's police terrorize oppositions and preclude them from contesting. Thus, there is no balance in the Russian government. But with stable progress, meaning the ability for us to move forward without massive instability, even if we move slower than desired at times. The important factor is that we are not moving backwards or remaining stagnant. For example, countries like Belgium go years without any government at all because of an inability to reach conclusions. Thus, the burden of the proposition is to show that the American two-party system upholds these two principles. The opposition's burden is to prove that the harms of the system outweigh the benefit. Additionally, we ask the opposition what the world would look like if the U.S. was not a two-party system. Thus, they are encouraged to provide an alternative system as exemplary. Our first substantive argument is that the two-party system keeps America centrist. There are two layers of analysis under this. First, appealing to moderates. Second, the international converse. But our first layer of analysis goes through internal systems. Our two-party system is such that it appeals to the center. The two-party system prevents majority parties from campaigning with outlandish policies. As the parties campaigning require supermajorities to win elections, they are forced to appeal to moderates. Look to the example of 2004 Bush and Cheney, when they shifted to the center on gay rights issues due to pressure from both sides. More similarly, the same goes for individuals running for office. When KKK member David Duke runs for a seat in Senate, he can't campaign in his own French party and get votes that way. The strong moderates in the center prevent his elections. But since individuals need to be in the majority to affect policy making, there is substantial incentive to appeal to the majority. Even if there is a radical party able to take change, there will always be an opposition that is well coordinated and strong. Why is this true? First, it is true because the opposition will always be a single party, one unified body as opposed to a coalition or multiple opposition parties. But first, a point.
Okay, so if your point is trying to create a true democratic society, wouldn't that also include other parties such as the Libertarian Party with Gary Johnson this year and the Independents and also the Green Party?
Exactly. Within the two-party system, all of these voices can be adequately heard. If we look to a multi-party system, their voices are going to be quickly washed out by the stronger political leaders. You can look to the example that I already gave of how individuals have had their policies influenced through these different types of groups. But more specifically, since individuals need to be in the majority to affect policy making, there is substantial influence to appeal to the majority. Even if there is a radical party that is able to take change, there will always be an opposition that is well coordinated and strong. As one body, the opposition party has immensely more political capital than a fragmented body. Thus, their bargaining power is much stronger. Thus, the opposition is always able to check the majority party, even if it attempts to propose something radical. For example, When FDR tried to circumvent the Constitution and hack the Supreme Court, Congress was unable to stop him because of the majority. Centricism means that these racist regimes will no longer be able to win elections. It means that the policies that rely on terrorizing minorities will never be implemented. A dual-party system does not just protect the interests of many who are benefited by centrist policies, but it protects those who are harmed by fringe extremism. Our second layer of analysis is international converse. If we are interrogating the merits of the two-party system, then it begs the question of what is the converse. Converse is the instability of shifting multi-party systems around the globe. A multi-party system, because parties can ally themselves with the coalition they want, can change the coalitions they belong to instantly. So the multi-party system endangers rapidly shifting policies and instability. Thus, governments have massive shifts in structure which harm the long-term stability of the government. For example, France shifted literally from a democratic republic to a socialist state almost overnight. In Scotland, UKIP was able to take over because of a quick coalition building and a lack of unified opposition. UKIP, a nationalist, anti-immigrant party that won votes off racist, divisive rhetoric, was able to do this. Because a multi-party system means that the government you fell asleep with today might not be the one you wake up with tomorrow. A dual-party system is infinitely better. But first, your point.
If one party in this two-party system, can't one party, if they get the majority, end up controlling the government and completely bash the opinion out of the, I guess, like such as Democrats and Republicans, would it bash the other party out, being the minority in that aspect?
Within the United States two-party system, two different types of ideals are represented. Both ideals may be shifted by the independent policies that groups have proposed. More specifically, you can look to the examples in the 2016 election, how environmental issues have come into play because of third-party candidates. But specifically, look to our first layer of analysis under our second argument that the dual-party system allows for effective coalition building. Coalition building in a dual-party system improves minority representation. Any government requires a coalition, but there are simply not enough like-minded people to build a party with a majority of their own. A two-party system, coalition, decided first in forming the party. So voters join a party based on shared interests, and multitude of voters shift the party in different directions, leading to a party vision that effectively represents all voting for it. When you vote two-party, you know exactly what you are voting for. This is principally good because it assures a legitimate election, because voters active are interested in their outcomes being reflected. Practically, this is effective because it assures that voters' needs are met. Look to the example of a multi-party state of Israel. The party that received plurality of votes was not in majority coalition. More specifically, other systems require coalition building post-election. You don't know what will be given up or accepted to maintain power, and you don't know whose needs will be held highest. More specifically, minorities are better represented in dual-party states where they know that one party is accountable for them and their voices can actually be heard. Our second layer of analysis is on democratic stability. Consistent identity politicking performed by identity-based groups in a multi-party state damages coalitions because politicking literally prevents these coalitions from being formed. On the other hand, coalition building in dual-party systems removes identity politicking that damages coalitions by requiring them to be built before the election. So for these reasons, we are proud to propose.
All right. I thank the first proposition speaker for her speech, and I would like to invite the first opposition speaker.
I'm Fox, by the way.
Nice to meet you.
Yes, sir.
Do you want a quick roadmap of what I'm going to do before I start my speech, or do you want that in the speech?
That's generally in the speech.
Okay. Is everybody ready?
Yes.
Okay. First, I'd like to give a quick roadmap of what I'm going to accomplish and do during this speech. First, I'd like to say my arguments to the opposition, and then also address the arguments they made in their speech and the responses they made to my points of information that I asked them. So, first, it's going to be huge. I mean, let's go with this. We see this man. I mean, in the two-party system, we have actually seen, this is common knowledge, I shouldn't have to cite this, that there is divisions in our own two-party system. So therefore, we see this as a fact that our own two-party system is crumbling within itself. because this creates multiple factions and the Republican and Democrats. Those are the majority parties in this two-party system, and that's what this makes up, and that's what they defined. So if there are these factions in these parties, then this is no longer a two-party system. This creates multiple parties and multiple viewpoints within our own two-party system. So this completely contradicts the idea of a two-party system. So they're going to try to tell me that, well, this doesn't matter, they still picked a candidate. Well, that candidate, half the time, doesn't act like even he's a Republican. So, I mean, it almost seems this is contradictory. And
Sir.
Okay, and moving on to my first point I would like to make is that, well, first I would like to by reading, we the United States citizens pride ourselves upon being a part of this country. The United States is a nation that values the rights of freedom and choice. Men, women, and children of all different cultures, beliefs, and races are able to find a place where any individual can be comfortable with the opinions they have, the choices they make. However, the United States is also home to a two-party political system, which gives our citizens the options of choosing one candidate to take a certain office. But the opposition is trying to argue there are problems with this. What happens when citizens feel as if they are forced to act between a rock and a hard place? As the former Hall of Fame instructor, Robert Byrne, would say about our political system, democracy is being allowed to vote for candidates you dislike least.
Sir, don't you agree that individuals that have differing opinions within the two-party system can influence the policies that are being made?
Well, first off, I would like to say that in the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, there are different types of people. There are moderates, conservatives, and liberals. So as we see, this almost seems like these ideologies create maybe almost a three-party system within an own party. So I guess your statement needs to be thrown out the window. And moving on to my point one, the U.S. party system is already undergoing change. Leonard Brzezinski of Democrats, June 2016. There are most distinct constituencies and more ideologies in U.S. society than the current system recognizes, such as the Libertarian Party, the Independent Party, and also these different parties that we see. And then I would like to say that later contentions that I will read will be addressed in my partner's speech and the two opposition speech. And then moving on down, the United States is based upon the idea of democracy, okay? So we see this idea of democracy, even though it's a representative democracy, but I guess the point of democracy is to try to include everybody's viewpoints. And the two-party system has ultimately failed to do that, as we see, and especially this year, as I stated earlier in my speech. And also, the use of a multi-party system would create more people to allow to share their viewpoints.
Sir.
And also stating something from Eric Black, senior writer of the Huffington Post, December 2012, our American party system provides us only with two meaningful choices in most general elections. But it's not just a fact that most democracies in the world have more than two parties that play more politically meaningful role than any third parties do in the United States, or have for more than a century. No one other than a Democrat or Republican has been elected since Whig nominee Zachary Taylor in 1848. No party other than the Democrats or the Republicans has held a majority or anything near a majority, even a numerically significant minority. In either house, okay, so
Sir.
in either house of Congress since the Republican Party came along, Digger's law, this forces those who might favor a minority party candidate to either vote for whichever the two biggest parties the voter dislikes the least or risk likelihood the vote will be wasted. Or worse, they will end up helping the majority party candidate whom the voter dislikes the most to win. So it forces, the two-party system forces people to vote for somebody sometimes that they don't even want to do. And I mean, as American citizens, it seems like that we're required to vote and almost looked down upon by people if we don't vote. I mean, we get an exercise to vote, so we can vote for whatever party we want to vote for. And a two-party system causes a vacuum of only attracting these masses of people and not actually trying to get all the ideas in, such as these major parties. And moving on to my point two, or actually no, just to clarify this point, our party system does not take into account the diversity of politics and views in America. Either democracies are no two-party systems if there are any third parties have more than an influence upon the government by instances of divergence law and U.S. voting process and systematic issues regarding third-party candidates. And my next two contentions, I read two in this speech, will be addressed in the second opposition speech by my partner, Mr. Jackson. And I would like to address some of their arguments they made in this thing. First is coalition building, and I read a card and I read a contention that completely threw this out the window. So the point of ours and the plan of ours is that the benefits do not outweigh the harm.
Sir?
Yes. And that we see that basically that this coalition does not even matter. And I stated earlier that there are warring factions in the parties, so why does a coalition matter?
Sure.
Sir.
And then first, they're apparently keeping Americans' interest. Okay, so this year we see a dramatic uptick in Gary Johnson at 9%. So ultimately, if he got to 15%, his would be, which would destroy this and make this a third-party system. So, or make this a three-party system if the Libertarian Party was allowed into this. So, as a matter of fact, coalitions don't matter. And then moving on, historically, this is a democratic system. This is not a democratic system. A democratic system, the whole point is to include every viewpoint. I understand there are parties to make these, and they're going to state that in their speech, and that I'm wrong about this, is that multiple parties, this is what the U.S. is built. Freedom of choice, freedom of speech, freedom of liberty, or freedom of choice, freedom of religion. This is the whole point and basis. People are allowed to start their parties. And if we can emphasize that a two-party system causes a vacuum and it causes these benefits not to outweigh the harms, because the harms definitely outweigh this. And if we keep going this way, then I mean, say the Republican Party can control the government. This would take out the Democrats' point of view. So therefore, it seems this is kind of corrupt in this instance. And that's all. Thank you.
All right, thank you for this opposition. I now invite the second proposition speaker to come up. That's fine, no worries.
Team proposition functionally has one argument in today's debate. What our opponents tell you is that democracy serves to include all people's voices. But we say that's an extremely pedestrian and non-nuanced analysis of democracy, insofar as Sarah, in her first speech, tells you that the contents of democracy, the American one, which is what we're debating today, is that of balance and stable progress. The point at which they do not interact with either of those mechanisms, we say that they are clearly behind both the framework and the contention level offense in today's debate. Three things in this speech. First, I'm going to address the entirety of Team Opposition's case. Secondly, rebuild upon what Sarah so eloquently brought you in her first speech. After that, the third argument, which is the idea of how two parties serves as a check on one another. But let's talk about Team Opposition's case. They functionally have one argument, which is the idea that right now in the status quo, there are certain divisions in democracy. And they say because of this, we are simply no longer a two-party system. Well, what we tell you is that the proposition defends the status quo in that the way in which the American democracy is currently functioning right now, which is that there are two major parties that have control, Democrats and Republicans. Even if Donald Trump right now is saying things that don't exactly line up with the typical Republican agenda, that does not mean that we do not no longer have a two-party system. Secondly, what they tell you is that freedom of choice is essential in a democracy. Yes, we tell you freedom of choice is essential in democracy, but it is not the only thing that is important in democracy.
The point at which multi-party systems across the world literally crush out the ability for opposition to actually engage with the material and engage with the political system. We see that freedom of choice is comparatively worse in a world where there is no multi-party system. And a benefit of the two-party system, what we say, is that it is not a multi-party system. We encourage them to engage with the analysis that we tell you. Additionally, what they say is that, well, the system is changing more to incorporate more parties into the American system now. Again, this is just a reiteration of the first argument that we hear. Even if Gary Johnson campaigns as a libertarian, we still have the status quo, we still have the major two-party system. This is just a definitional misunderstanding. I would encourage them to sort out for their next speech. Finally, what they tell you is that we do not include everyone's viewpoint in the current status quo. But I would ask them, how is this true? Note that they provide no causal links throughout their entire speech as to why their arguments are true and what the impact or the actual evidence of that would be in society. So when they say that there is not enough representation, first I'd ask them how. Second, I'd say, what is the converse? The converse is the system of the multi-party system in which collusion is rampant, in which there is systems of party favors, and I'll take you in a second, where Belgium can literally go 585 days without a government because of things like internal trading, because of things like money. We say that that is comparatively better when there is not a two-party system. Go ahead.
Okay, can you give me a statistic on actually how many people support the two-party system? I'm just asking.
I mean, you can ask me that later. I'd be sure to talk to you about it. But right now what we're saying is that whether or not the individuals in the United States support the two-party system is not an argument for your side. The argument for your side, which you should have made in your last speech, is talking about the intrinsic merits and why that's bad, not simply saying right now in the current political sphere the two-party system isn't working. This debate is not about today's election. This is about the interrogation of the intrinsic goods of democracy. And insofar as we get no engagement from team opposition side of the House with the material Sarah gives you, we see that's a clear proposition ballot. Let's move on to our side of the House and the material we give you, because really we get no engagement on that, so I'm going to spend some more time building this up. Sarah tells you there are two key aspects to American democracy uniquely because of the society we live in. We say that those are balance and stable progress. Balance means things like not being able to wake up the next day and see that your state has turned into a socialist regime because a fringe party has taken control. Stable progress means that we are able to have policy making and actually take steps forward, even if we're not doing that at the fastest pace possible. So we look at countries like Spain, where they go months without governments at a time, much like Belgium, and there's no stable progress actually being made. If we can prove to you in today's debate the American two-party system upholds these two principles, then that's a clear route to the proposition ballot. Let's talk about our first argument. Our first argument, which we get no engagement with whatsoever from our opponents, is the idea of centrism. We say that the two-party system right now actually appeals to moderate voters, so it disallows for fringe parties and fringe individuals to get control. What do I mean by this? We say that, for example, when Bush campaigns, he has to take a more liberal approach on LGBTQ rights because he's being pushed by the Democratic Party. We say that people like David Duke, for example, who is a KKK member who is running for Senate, cannot actually get elected because he doesn't have enough support either in the Democrats or the Republicans. Conversely, in a multi-party system, if he was running, he could, and I'll take you in a second, campaign and get the votes of his fringe party, and that could potentially be enough to put him in power. We don't see that in the two-party system. Go ahead.
Okay, give me a clear definition of democracy.
Okay. As I said before, we say the stable democracy consists of the idea of having balance and having stable progress. I think that's explicitly clear in today's debate. Okay, we proved to you why those things are true. We say additionally that the second argument is the idea of coalition building. And all they tell us is that coalition building is bad. I ask, what do you mean by this? Because coalition building is a nuanced concept. We say that in the United States two-party system, coalitions are made before elections, so that means that there are certain allegiances and agreements that are made prior to elections, so that when people actually go to campaign, the American constituents know who they're voting for, know what the party platforms are. Conversely, in a multi-party system, coalitions are made after elections, so there's more room for things like internal trading, party favors, and the platforms actually shift, and individuals ultimately have no idea what they're going to be actually voting for. What we tell you secondly is that identity-based coalitions are not formed in certain other two-party systems. We have things like the Congressional Black Caucus in the United States, which actually serves to affect policymaking, but in a multi-party system, when we have minority coalitions, they are forced to go underneath other certain coalitions and expect for them to advocate for their rights, as opposed to in the United States. Let's talk about the final argument, which is the idea that the two parties serves as watchdogs on one another. Two levels of analysis underneath this. First, transparency. Second, collusion. As a strong opposition will always seek to undermine the party in power, we say they do this by serving as watchdogs on one another and by calling out problems and corruption. The opposing party keeps the other in check. A historical precedent proves this is true. For example, look at the Teapot Dome scandal, where President Harding was caught by bribery for oil trading with internal companies, and his Republican administration was investigated by an entirely Democratic group. Why is this important? The Democrats were a uniquely unified body because they're from one party and were thus able to call him out on his corruption because they were so unified, because they were a strong opposition. Additionally, look to how certain senators with the Indian Affairs Lobbying Council back in 2006 who were Republican were challenged by an all-Democrat party who actually publicized this and made it to an important issue. The reason why this is an argument for the proposition is because the two parties are so diametrically opposed to one another, they serve as watchdogs, this decreases corruption, and there's more transparency. Second, collusion. This is fairly simple. We say that collusion is bad because it creates client-based corruption where largest party trade political flavors and party positions to build coalitions. For example, in Italy, Social Democrats held power for 40 years by running a system of internal trading favors and even cash in order to keep their coalition in power because their coalitions were built after elections. We say that corruption literally becomes an intrinsic part of multipolar systems. There is not this watchdog effect. For all these reasons, proud to propose.
All right, thank you, Proposition 2. I'd like to invite Opposition 2 up. I'm ready.
So, first I would like to start off by talking about some points that they said against our own case and our own opposition, and then I would like to clarify and extend our own case. Now, I would like to start off first as they talked about the definition of democracy, and they said that, quote, a stable democracy consists of balanced and stable progress. Now, they didn't really give a quote on this, they didn't give a source on this, which is why I say that if I can provide a definition or some valuable source on the definition of democracy, then my approach to democracy is better. And I do have a source. According to Dr. Abdul Rauf from the Eurasia Review in an article made in February 9th of 2016, democracy is defined by the number of political parties and political freedoms the people enjoy. Now, basically what that is saying is that people have the freedom and the ability to enjoy their own political views, their own political beliefs. And the two-party system just doesn't allow that. Even in their own evaluation of the two-party democracy, they say that the two-party democracy is made.
Sir,
Yes.
how are people supposed to enjoy their voices being heard if there are so many parties speaking at once, nothing gets done?
I will explain that as I was just doing. Now, as I was saying, the two-party system, as I said, is made to be centrist, and so that the majority of a vote basically comes in, basically saying that one party doesn't take too much of an opposition from the other, everything's very centered. The majority can buy into one side or another, which goes against my own definition of democracy and overall goes against the definition of democracy. Now, as she just asked me, how can people enjoy their freedom in being able to choose whatever political ideology they want? Well, just listen to how they explain democracy in the two-house party system. They defined it as being centrist in order to conclude the majority of people. The definition stated by this Dr. Abdul Rauf is stating that democracy is being able to have many parties and enjoying your every central
Sir.
And now, as I am now stating, what I'm basically saying is that the two-party house system, by their own definition, is not bringing in, is not clarifying, is not making these different views true. Now, what I will say is that by having multiple parties, you can effectively take into consideration different points and different viewpoints. Now, just because one party might be more powerful than another doesn't necessarily mean that viewpoints aren't being heard.
How can we take into account all of these voices if you look to the example of places like Spain that have been in political gridlock for 9 different months because of all the different parties?
Well, in short, I would like to say that the difference between Spain and the U.S. is that the United States is the United States. And what I'm basically trying to say is that the United States, as they said in the beginning of their arguments, is that the two-house party system is here and continues to be here mainly because it is historic and is the pillar of our democratic system. And as we see today in debate, I'm using this as an example, the example of Donald Trump and the Republican Party or Bernie Sanders and the DNC. People did not have their viewpoints fully expressed, as opposed by in the DNC when people were up in arms when Bernie endorsed Hillary Clinton, or when someone such as Donald Trump is the nominee and is going to run to be president. Now, I would like to go on by saying that they are basically saying that by making a centrist view, you are able to somehow culminate and somehow hear everyone's voices. Now, I would like to start off without even going further on down through all of their points. The fact is, they are trying to say that the U.S. democracy brings in everyone's viewpoints. Well, by their own definition of their own form of democracy, everyone's viewpoints are not heard and is made to be centrist. So by their own ideology, they have basically just erupted all of their points. All of their points are basically leading towards, yes, the two-party house system. The two-party house system can and will take into consideration everyone's points. But how can it do that if what they have been saying since the beginning is that this is a historical party system that makes things centrist? So by that, all that I'm saying is their whole arguments, it doesn't matter what they're saying. They say it keeps America centrist, which means that there can be no democracy, as proposed by the quote by Dr. Abdul Rauf. Now, what I would also like to say is that they want to say that by having too many parties, a party is dominating. Well, I would like to propose that that the two-house party system is based upon a party dominating over another. When you think about it, the two-house...
Oh, okay. So in a dual-party state, do either of the two parties get as large a hold on the government for as long times as like coalitions and multi-party states do?
And to that, I would like to say that I will continue my point, which will also expand upon what he's saying. The two-house party system, as I was stating, is based upon the fact that one party will dominate over another. It's so much a sense that one party will dominate over another that the third parties don't even have a chance. And with that taken into consideration, I would like you to please oppose this.
Okay. I would like to thank the second opposition speaker, and I invite the third proposition speaker to please come up.
Sounds good.
Team opposition would have you believe that a two-party system and that today's motion is a choice between left or right. But that's not what the two-party system is, and that's not what today's debate is about. Today's debate is a choice between up or down. the proposition world or the opposition world. Because I'll show you in this speech exactly why the proposition world upholds the core tenets of democracy that this House, that Team Government is proud to propose today's motion. So first let's go into their definition of democracy and sort of the definition of democracy that we need to use for this round. I'm sure Dr. Abdul might be really smart, but bringing up a card in the second opposition doesn't mean that you win the definition. But even if you buy there, even if you agree that the definition of democracy is the number of parties and the number of freedoms, understand that the entire definition of democracy that Sarah brought up in the first government and that Liz continued in the second government actually meets that. Here's why. Because the number of parties is irrelevant. One party is continually dominated by the other. Remember that we tell you that Putin's police terrorizes oppositions and precludes them from contesting. That's a multi-party system, just like the opposition world would have you agree to. The problem is that there's literally no balance in that multi-party state. In a dual-party state, no party is able to have a hold on the government, to dominate the government for as long as coalitions are in the multi-party state. Remember the example that Liz provided you of the Social Democrats in Italy, which literally used corruption, graft, bribery, extortion, and the trading of political favors in order to get their way, in order to hold power for literally 40 years. But the Democrats and Republicans in America have never been able to have a hold on the government for that long. There's balance in our system, and that's why the balance is important. Now let's understand why a stable progress is important. They tell you that the number of freedoms is what's really important to democracy, but recognize that it doesn't matter how many rights citizens are afforded on paper if their government will never grant them to, or if their government will never grant those rights to them. Belgium was left for 589 days without a government. They literally went for a government for over 1.5 years. No government to protect their civil rights, no government to protect men and women, no government to protect innocents. But first, a point.
Okay, so you stated clearly that one party could dominate the system. So what's the point of a two-party system then?
Literally the entire point of any government is that there's got to be somebody in charge. Even in a multi-party state, even in the opposition world, a multi-party coalition dominates the other coalitions. The only difference is that in a dual-party state, no party is able to have a continued hold on the government for as long as it is in multi-party states. The example of Italy proves that if a single party in a coalition can hold the government for 40 years, but that never occurs in a dual-party state, that a multi-party state is already inherently worse on balance. But now let's understand, they bring up all these examples about this election. They talk to you about Donald Trump, they talk to you about Bernie Sanders, and we'll address those. But first, understand that 240 years of stable progress and balance is not undermined by 1 year, not undermined by one election. Remember that Liz pointed out the example of the Teapot Dome scandal, in which a group of minority Democrat senators targeted the Republican administration and brought to light corruption. Remember the example we provided you in 2006, where Republican Senator Bill Frist had insider trading schemes exposed by Democratic minority senators. And even more, they continued in that year when Democratic senators took charge in investigating the Indian affairs in the Jack Abramoff lobbying scandal to expose the other party. Remember that we tell you that it's a unique benefit of the dual-party system because the dual-party system creates a unified opposition to one monolithic bloc. The reason that's important was first because it keeps America centrist. Remember that we tell you in our first argument that Sarah brought up in the first speech that the reason a unified opposition was essential is because it prevents outlandish policies from being elected. Let's say hypothetically that David Duke became his party's nominee, which he didn't, which he won't, because of the centrism that exists in the dual-party system already. But remember that Liz and Sarah both showed you that with a unified opposition against David Duke, no one would be able to, David Duke would never take office. A leader of the KKK would never take office in American politics under a dual-party system. The problem is with their system, a multi-party system, where if David Duke wins off of vote splitting between Democrats and social democrats and progressives and liberals, a racist, nationalist demagogue literally takes charge of parliament. We showed you how this has happened in Britain and Scotland more specifically, where UKIP was able to take control. And then we also show you this happened in France, where France basically transitioned from a democratic state, I'll take your point in a second, to from a democratic state to a socialist state almost overnight because of rapid changes in coalition building. But first, a point.
Okay, so you're stating that one party should control the government, so wouldn't that take your definition of a two-party system out of the question?
Okay, that's not what I'm saying. That's not what you're saying either. Any government is based off of the fact that there's probably going to be a majority party. In your system, in a multi-party state, a couple of parties come together and form a coalition. I'm about to explore why coalition building is bad, but let's first understand that in both your situation and in my situation, a larger party or a larger coalition is in charge of the majority of the government. But now building off of that point, let's examine exactly why coalition building after the election, as opposed to before the election, is so dangerous. Remember that we told you that literally there's always going to be coalition building in an election. The difference between a dual-party system and a multi-party system is that coalition building happens before the election rather than after the election. So let's look at why this is important in a dual-party system. The reason it's important is because voters' interests are reflected. In what happens in a two-party system and a dual-party system is that the interests of people like those who voted for Bernie Sanders are represented. Because when Hillary Clinton shifts to the left on issues like trade and the minimum wage, their interests are reflected. Remember, they keep telling you that Bernie Sanders supporters aren't recognized in the status quo, that they're marginalized. That's simply not true. At the point where a dual-party system not only ensures that your viewpoints are addressed, but also that we're actually able to implement policies that concern your viewpoints, then a dual-party system is much better than a multi-party system. But now let's understand exactly why coalition building in a multi-party system is dangerous to democracy, undermining not only balance and social progress, but also creating corruption. Liz told you that collusion occurs in a coalition building system because parties form larger coalitions, and literally the only way they can do that is by running a system of graft. Remember that we showed you that in several cases, coalitions often don't get built in the first place. In Belgium, 589 days, Belgium was without a government. In Spain, Spain is literally in a governmental crisis right now and has been for the last 9 months because of vote splitting. They weren't able to form a coalition, which means that all the number of freedoms that team opposition talked about will literally never be protected. But now let's understand why it also engenders corruption. Because the only way that coalitions can get built in multi-party states is because graft and bribery are essential to greasing the wheels of the multi-party system. Liz pointed out the example of the Social Democrats in Italy that used corruption, bribery, extortion to gain power for 40 years. Not only does this mean that corruption is an intrinsic part of team opposition's world and a multi-party system, but it also undermines the balance that they care about so much. They literally tell you that the number of political parties, the number of viewpoints is important, but they don't seem to understand that their own multi-party system allows for larger parties to take control and hold governments for literally decades on end. For all these reasons, we're proud to propose.
Alright. I thank the third opposition speaker, and I invite the third proposition. I invite the third opposition speaker to come up.
Wait, next is after this first opposition,
So it's third op, and then op reply, and then prop reply, and then done.
Thank you.
Sure, no worries.
Third parties in America have never taken hold. Thus, two parties have controlled America since the beginning. This contradicts the arguments that a two-party system represents all voices. Two out of several parties have been in control since America's beginnings. All points are effective when their contradictions are taken into action. As Mr. Fox said so firmly, the divisions in our two-party system have created factions in these parties. These factions have grown, and the two-party system cannot be recognized, are almost unrecognizable today. These factions contradict the two-party system because as these factions begin to grow and grow, the parties barely are recognizable. The second is choice. People should have the choice. It shouldn't be limited to the two parties that are already there. Yes.
Okay, so your first point, or what you basically first said, is that America doesn't allow third parties to take hold. But then you tell us that these two parties are currently fracturing into factions in other parties. Reconcile your argument that America doesn't have third parties, and then your argument that America isn't a two-party system anymore.
Yes, this is what I'm arguing, that I'm saying that the two-party system is unrecognizable today because of so many factions in these two parties. As I can continue on, the people are not given the choice they want to because there's only two parties.
Sir,
Yes.
how are people supposed to be given a choice if their country is in political gridlock for up to 9 months?
Well, as you said in your framework, it doesn't matter if the country's in political gridlock, because in your framework we're trying to uphold democracy, and if we're trying to uphold democracy, we're getting everyone a voice, and we're giving everyone a voice. This goes back into my choice. The third is democracy. We try to include everyone's view. That is the definition of democracy. We're trying to get everyone's viewpoint into their own government. Failing to do so is to American citizens are forced to vote for people who they don't want to. The prominence of a third-party candidate has risen over the years, which shows people want a third party, and the two-party system should not be the status quo. And so this means we need to move on to a third party. As my opponent said, that the two-party system keeps one party in check, but the party that keeps another party in check, it has their own agenda in play, so the parties can never, I guess.
Sir?
Yes.
If one party has its own agendas and the other party checks their corruption, but also has its own agendas, doesn't that literally mean that both parties are just going to check each other, more corruption is going to be exposed, and all in all, American government works better?
Yes, but my opponent also said in one of his points, he said, keeping America centrist. People need choices, and these choices.
Sir, people have choices in the two-party system by either voting for the candidate they want or trying to instill new policies to shift these candidates towards their own views.
Well, the people, if they don't want to vote for this candidate, they're, I guess, forced to vote because for this candidate they don't really want to. But, this is all. That is all. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. All right. Thank you, Opposition 3. Opposition reply speech. You got 4 minutes.
Before I begin my speech, I would like to ask if everybody is ready. And I would like to ask first, is everybody ready?
Yes.
Okay. Let's go.
Okay.
First, I would like to state, I never got a solid source for them saying that Spain and other countries are in political gridlock. I had no source for that, such as a major news source like BBC, The Guardian, CNN, and other sources like that. So therefore, this whole argument of this being multi-party systems being bad in that instance is thrown out the window. So therefore, we went on this impact. I mean, come on. And then also, I would like to state that they showed and gave examples of corruption in the own two-party system with the scandals they brought up and also the other things that they brought up. So therefore, they are stating and giving us more information to state that there is things wrong with the two-party system. So therefore, that argument should be thrown out the window, and that statement also goes to us. So we're also almost permutating what they have said. And then also, I mean, corruption, the whole definition of democracy is to include points. That is a foundation in America's society. And you also did state that one party can dominate. Right now, the Republicans in the House, in the Senate, hold 2/3 majority. So this puts the Democrats out of the window. And then we also have a Democratic president, and we see constant bashing between, especially when they make a deal. We see them, oh, I shouldn't have made this, oh, I shouldn't have done this. So what's the whole point of them even doing this with each other? I don't see this almost brings up a political stalemate, almost like China with Xi Jinping and its CCP. And also, I can't say that, I mean, how many times they have thrown out blankless warrants. I'm used to doing policy debate. I'm sorry, I have to have sources for some of these things. And they could also give me no statistic on how many people support these majority parties. I mean, it may be a lot, but I'm not seeing a statistic, so therefore that point. And how are coalitions bad? Parties form coalitions when they pick their candidate. So this point about coalition building and how we're dog washing this and how we're blank washing something does not matter. Just from this clear point. They're almost internalizing themselves and contradicting themselves on these points. So Judge, I would please like you to make a note of that. And then also, I mean, they are two divided factions. I mean, we see senators such as Lindsey Graham and other major senators that say they will not vote for Donald Trump. Even Mitch McConnell at the beginning, they were forced into supporting him because that's what the Republican Party apparently wanted. And then we also see Bernie Sanders, as both my partners said and stated, that they were outraged. I mean, the party, you can see the own corruption within the Democratic Party itself, of them trying to ruin his campaign and trying to boast Hillary. So what's the point of a two-party system when it's corrupt in its own self? And they should not be able to make an argument to that because they have fed our argument of corruption in the two-party system. The harms do outweigh the benefits by far. And they fed us this information, and slowly, as that keeps going on. And my opponent clearly used sources and other things, so therefore we weren't throwing out blankless warrants. And also it's pretty much common knowledge this guy has caused issues, and there are factions in both parties. And I mean, just by the basis of America's Constitution, and I shouldn't have to cite a source for this, is that we have freedom of choice, freedom of speech, and also all the other things that the First Amendment encompasses. So therefore, this creates a vacuum for their case. And also all the arguments they said, and they're going to say, I did drop their arguments. No. I have clearly addressed the 4 contentions they made and the dog washing contention 1 and all the other contentions. Thank you very much, and I hope you vote for the opposition on this.
Okay, thank you very much, opposition. Proposition to reply? Sorry. Fine.
My opponents has shifted a lot in today's debate. The first speaker tells us that the current system is really bad and that multi-party systems are better. In the second speech, we don't really get a coherent stance as to what they stand for. By the third speech, we hear that the third-party system, a system with 3 parties, is preferable. And by the fourth speech, we get some dubious pontification about the current election going on. But Mr. Speaker, today's debate is not about the current political election. It is about the 240 years of the American two-party system, which has served for stability and for progress. That's why we propose today's motion. In this speech, 2 questions. First, I'm going to talk about the principles of democracy, who best has the best democratic world. Second, about the intrinsic goods of the two-party system. First, let's talk about democracy on the principle level. Now note that Sarah tells you that you should be voting for the side that produces the best democratic world. Insofar as we're the only side with the most coherent and consistent stance, we see that's a clear vote for the proposition. What they tell you is that democracy is contingent on whoever has the most amount of parties. We say this is a non-nuanced interpretation, and that Germany, that has 172 parties, on face is immediately better than Canada, for example, but that's not an accurate metric by which to judge how many parties are good. But then they say, no, we're going to defend the multi-party system, and we're going to stand by that. Okay, then engage with the examples we give you about Belgium, explain to me the examples about Spain and Italy, but unfortunately we get no engagement with that. So you have to look to the proposition. Additionally, under this principle, they finally tell you, well, it's including everyone's voice in the system. The point at which the multi-party system actually precludes the ability for other people's voices to be incorporated into the system, that is a harm. That is why a benefit of the two-party system is that it is not the multi-party system. We tell you that balance and stable progress are two intrinsic aspects to American democracy. We tell you why all of our impacts link back to that. That's why you're voting for the proposition. Second question, the intrinsic goods of the two-party system. Because really, there's no offense on Team Opposition's side of the House today. We talked to you about centrism. We tell you how the reason why we don't see radical people being able to actually get control, people who are like racist like David Duke, is because we have a moderate like base to which they have to appeal to get votes. We see that even if candidates like Bernie, like Dr. Jill Stein, aren't able to actually get elected, they influence the policy making of people like Hillary Clinton. Similarly to how Al Gore influenced Bill Clinton back in the past too. This has happened for years at a time. Secondly, we tell you that we tell you the idea of choice in democracy. We tell you what's important is that there is a unified opposition which doesn't allow for radicals to take control. Aditya does a great job of this. This is the idea of when we have the Teapot Dome scandal, the idea of the Indian Affairs Council, that a unified opposition was able to call out the people that were in power and actually hold them accountable. In a multi-party system, the opposition is divided amongst coalitions, amongst different parties, which is why you see in the UK why UKIP is able to gain control, because their opposition is not one party. It's the Labour Party, it's the Social Democrats, it's a bunch of other people who cannot unify together and actually oppose them. If we're looking at the comparative worlds, on their side of the House, UKIP gets elected. On our side of the House, we see there is a unified opposition which is able to actually prevent that from happening. Because even if there are some internal divisions within the status quo right now, that is not a problem with the intrinsic merits of the two-party system. That is a problem with people like Donald Trump being racist. They do not actually answer the intrinsic merits or the intrinsic goods we give you. So yes, even if in the current political sector we see certain divisions like Lindsey Graham, that is not an intrinsic problem with the two-party system. That is a problem with people like Donald Trump who pervert it in the current status quo. They cannot ignore the fact that we tell you that over 240 years we've had a functioning system. In today's debate, look at what we tell you. Balance and stable progress. They have not engaged with that. We tell you why everything proves there was more balance and stable progress on our side of the House. That's why you propose.
Alright, good job everyone. Shake hands.
Great job.